I didn't take the job at Station K9 because I wanted adventure. I took it because I wanted silence. After years of working night security in cities that never slept, I thought a research base in the Arctic would finally give me peace, a place where no one could find me, where the noise of everything I'd left behind would freeze and stay buried under the snow. They said it was a simple position: night operations technician. Keep the generators running, log power fluctuations, monitor the thermal sensors. 8 hours alone while the rest of the team slept. Easy money, they said. The supply helicopter dropped me off at dusk, though dusk didn't mean much this far north. The horizon glowed with a permanent, bruise-colored twilight, the sun never fully rising or setting. The wind had a voice here, whispering across the ice like something alive. I remember my first step off the chopper. The cold felt solid, like I'd walked into a wall of glass. I could taste metal in the air. The only building in sight was a low concrete structure, half buried under snow, its floodlights flickering through the fog. Someone was waiting by the entrance, a man in a red parka, face half covered by frost. "Welcome to K9, he said. His breath formed a brief cloud before vanishing. "Name's Dr. Harrow. I run things here." Inside, the heat hit like a wave. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, lined with peeling warning signs in both English and Russian. Somewhere, a generator throbbed with a low, rhythmic pulse. The crew was small, 7 of them, not counting me. I met them one by one in the mess hall. Their names barely stuck, maybe because they all felt the same: polite smiles, tired eyes, a stiffness I couldn't place. It was as if they were actors waiting for their cue. The cook, a woman named Sloane, served me something hot and gray. "Takes a few days to adjust," she said quietly. "Everyone does." When I asked what she meant, she just smiled and stirred her drink until it was nothing but foam. That night, I explored the station while everyone else slept. The hallways twisted like veins, leading to labs sealed behind keypads I wasn't cleared for. The windows were thick with ice, and when I wiped one clean, I thought I saw movement outside, a figure walking along the perimeter, slow and deliberate. But when I checked the live feed on the security monitors, there was nothing. Just snow and the ghostly reflection of my own face staring back at me. I told myself it was fatigue. The flight, the cold, the altitude, it all played tricks on the senses. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off. When I finally made it to my quarters, I noticed a note taped to the wall above the desk, typed in plain black ink. No signature. "Do not leave the main building between 200 and 0400. Do not respond to voices outside. Keep the lights dim at night. And if you hear someone knocking, count to 10 before answering." No explanation, no warning, just that. The paper fluttered when the vent hissed, as if the words themselves were breathing. I remember sitting there for a long time, staring at that note, wondering what kind of place I had just agreed to live in for the next 6 months. Outside, the wind rose to a howl, and somewhere in the distance, I could have sworn I heard footsteps crunching across the snow. Too slow to be human, too steady to be random. The next morning, Dr. Harrow called a short orientation in the communications room. He stood beside a corkboard cluttered with old maps, handwritten memos, and a single printed sheet titled Operational Protocols. "Most of what you'll do here," he said, "won't make sense until it does. Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine." He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give out of friendliness. It was the kind that says, "I've seen things you haven't, and I envy your ignorance." He ran through the basics first: power regulation, emergency drills, radio frequencies. It all sounded normal until he cleared his throat and added, "And then there are the specifics." He pinned a second sheet to the board, freshly printed, its edges still warm from the copier. I counted 7 rules. Dr. Harrow read them slowly. as if testing each word for weight. Rules for night shift operations. Station K9. Do not leave the main building between 200 and 0400 hours. If you hear knocking from the exterior doors, do not respond until the third sequence ends. If the knocking stops after the second, evacuate to the generator room immediately. Keep internal lighting below 40% brightness from midnight to dawn. The darker it is, the safer you are. If you see someone outside after 0100, notify command, but do not attempt visual confirmation. They will look like someone you know. They are not. The Northern Corridor Lab 3 remains sealed. No exceptions. If the door is open, alert Dr. Harrow personally. Do not look inside. Every morning at 0500, check the thermal sensors. If any record heat above human levels, turn off the main generator for exactly 2 minutes. Do not exceed that time. If you hear your name whispered over the radio, unplug your headset immediately. Wait 30 seconds before reconnecting. Do not reply. The room was silent when he finished. The other crew members didn't look surprised. They just nodded, like this was routine. I have waiting for someone to tell me it was a hazing ritual, but no one did. Sloan, the cook, glanced at me and whispered, "They'll make sense soon enough." I asked Dr. Harrow where the rules came from. He hesitated. "They were written after the third expedition," he said. "That team didn't come back." Then, as if catching himself, he clapped his hands and said, "Anyway, let's get you settled into your shift schedule." That evening, I began my first official night shift. The base transformed after dark. The fluorescent hum softened into a low, almost organic vibration that you could feel in your bones. The air vents sighed. The pipes clicked. It was like the building itself was breathing. The monitors lined one wall, 16 screens showing grainy feeds of the perimeter, the storage bay, and the buried tunnels leading to the iceboard chambers. Every so often, static washed across the screens, a white hiss that made the back of my neck tighten. I kept the lights low, as instructed. The emergency bulbs painted everything in dull amber, and shadows pooled in the corners like slow ink. At 0130, I brewed coffee, mostly to stay awake. That's when Sloan came in, wrapped in her parka though we were indoors. She stood by the doorway, eyes flicking to the cameras. "Don't stare at the glass too long," she said softly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The longer you look, the more it looks back." She didn't explain, just left the room, her boots echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. I tried to focus on my log sheet. Temperature steady, wind speed increasing, power output nominal. Then, a flicker on the far right monitor, the northwest camera, a shadow crossing the snow. Not fast, but deliberate. I leaned closer. The shape was roughly human, walking against the wind, head down. No reflective suit, no gear, just dark clothing that blended into the blue-gray blur of the landscape. I reached for the radio. "Command, this is Night Ops. I've got visual movement outside. Can someone confirm?" A pause. Then Harrow's voice crackled through. "Understood. Do not attempt visual confirmation. Keep eyes on the monitors only." It sounded absurd. How else was I supposed to confirm it? But his tone was calm, and for some reason, that calmness was worse than panic. I glanced back at the monitor. The figure had stopped. Its head was raised now, facing the camera directly. The screen pixelated, but I could swear it had my face. Then the feed went black. When it returned, the snow was empty again. My pulse slowed eventually. I logged it as a false reading, though I knew what I'd seen by 0300. I was counting the minutes until sunrise, except there wasn't one. Only the endless dim twilight, the faint shimmer of ice beyond the window, and the hum of the generators below. Before ending my shift, I noticed something strange near the northern corridor. A faint light leaking from under the sealed Lab 3 door. There was a sign posted there. "Authorized personnel only. Keep locked." I pressed my hand against the metal. It was warm. Then I remembered rule number 5. I backed away. As I left, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, movement in the reflection of the porthole glass. Not behind me, but inside the reflection itself. A figure, standing just over my shoulder. When I turned, there was no one there. My third night on shift was the first time I slipped. It started small. A miscalculation, a moment of curiosity that seemed harmless at the time. But out here, mistakes echo louder than footsteps. That evening, Harrow was unusually quiet during briefing. He avoided eye contact, and his hands trembled slightly as he passed me the new shift log. "Keep everything dim tonight," he said. "We've had fluctuations." When I asked what kind, he just said, "The kind that don't show up on paper." After midnight, the wind picked up hard enough to shake the walls. Snow rattled the metal siding like fingernails against a tin coffin. The power monitors flickered twice, once, twice, then stabilized at 0140. I noticed it again, that faint shimmer on the northwest camera feed, the same one where I'd seen my own face before. Only this time, it wasn't a shape in the snow. It was a figure standing right outside the main airlock. It didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, head tilted slightly upward, toward the lens. I grabbed the radio. "Command, this is Night Ops. Possible contact at North Airlock. Static." Then a faint voice. "Not Harrow's. You shouldn't watch." The transmission clicked off. I froze. The radio indicator showed no active line. I hadn't received an official transmission, but I had definitely heard someone speak. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. That's when I heard the knocking. 3 sharp raps on the outer door, slow and deliberate. I remembered rule number 2. Do not respond until the third sequence ends. I counted silently in my head. 1, 2, 3. Another sequence started, faster this time, more urgent. My heart pounded with each hit. The metal vibrated beneath my boots. Then, silence. Only 2 sequences. My breath clouded in the cold air. If the knocking stopped after the second sequence, I was supposed to evacuate to the generator room immediately, but I didn't. I hesitated, just long enough to make the wrong choice. I wanted to see, to confirm what was out there. I dimmed the lights further, crossed the hall, and peered through the narrow slit of the reinforced glass. There was nothing but swirling snow, then, faintly a shape in the distance. Someone walking away from the base, barefoot, leaving a trail of prints that steamed faintly against the frozen ground. It looked like Harrow. I blinked, and the trail vanished. The power flickered again. The emergency bulbs buzzed and went dark for less than a second. But in that second, I heard movement right behind me. A soft scrape, like skin sliding across metal when the lights came back. I was alone. I reported the incident the next morning, but Harrow brushed it off. "Wind pressure," he said, "causes the doors to flex. It sounds like knocking sometimes, but I heard." He cut me off. "Wind technician." That's all it was. His tone wasn't dismissive. It was warning. Later that day, I found a note slipped under my door. No handwriting, just a single line typed in the same machine font as the original rules. "Next time, don't look." No one admitted to leaving it. Sloan wouldn't meet my eyes during dinner. The others talked in hushed tones about equipment malfunctions and power irregularities, but whenever I entered the room, their conversations stopped. That night, I reread the rules again, my fingers tracing over the ink, as if trying to understand their shape. Each one now felt less like instruction and more like prophecy. I decided I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Whatever was outside, whatever had knocked, wasn't human. I knew that now. Still, as I prepared for my next shift, I caught myself glancing at the glass, just to be sure, and for a brief second, I saw a handprint on the inside of the door. My own hand, pressed flat against the metal, Fingers spread, frost crystallizing around it, except I hadn't touched it, and when I blinked, it was gone by my fifth night. I had stopped pretending the rules were superstition. I followed everyone to the letter. Lights dimmed, doors sealed, eyes down when the cameras fuzzed. Still, something felt wrong. The walls seemed to hum lower, deeper, as though the base itself was holding its breath. At 0045, I began my routine system check. The power grid was stable. Generator, temperature, normal. But when I reviewed the thermal sensors at 0500, rule number 6, I saw something impossible. A reading spiked on the east tunnel. Sensor, 61 degrees Celsius. No heat source in the Arctic should read that high, not even machinery. The rule was clear. If any record heat above human levels, turn off the main generator for exactly 2 minutes. I hesitated, remembering Harrow's warning about fluctuations. But orders were orders. I flipped the breaker. The hum of the bass died instantly. The silence that followed wasn't just absence of sound, it was presence of something else. Like the stillness before a voice. The lights went black, the air still. My watch ticked audibly, each second sharp, lonely, wrong. 1 minute in, I heard movement in the ventilation ducts. Slow dragging, something heavy. 2 minutes passed, and I hit the breaker again. Power surged back. Lights flickered to amber. The monitors rebooted, and one by one, the camera feeds came online. Except one. The northern corridor feed was dark. Static hissed faintly through its audio channel, a whisper buried in the noise. I turned the volume up just enough to catch a few words. Too late, already inside. Then silence. I checked the corridor myself, flashlight in hand. The air smelled faintly of ozone and rust. When I reached the sealed door to Lab 3, I noticed the padlock had been replaced, newer, shinier, freshly bolted. But the metal frame was warm again. I backed away slowly, repeating the rule in my head. If the door is open, alert Harrow personally, do not look inside. I wasn't sure what counted as open, but I didn't plan to find out. Later, in the mess hall, I confronted Sloane. What's in Lab 3? She looked tired, the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. You don't want to know. I already do. She hesitated, glancing at the security camera in the corner before leaning close. It's not a lab anymore. Not since the third team vanished. They said they found something in the ice core samples. Something that moved when it shouldn't. What kind of something? She looked away. They stopped calling it a specimen after the first winter. Her spoon clinked against her mug. Don't listen to the vents, she added. It likes to whisper through the old ducts. I stared at her, but she didn't answer. That night, the vents did whisper. At first it sounded like the usual moan of pressurized air, but soon it formed rhythm, cadence, language. It said my name, soft, stretched, like someone dragging it across glass. I unplugged my headset, remembering rule number 7. 30 seconds felt like an eternity. When I reconnected, all I heard was static. Then, faintly, look at the northern door. I shouldn't have, but curiosity has its own gravity. On the monitor, Lab 3's door stood ajar. Not much, just enough for darkness to leak through. Someone was standing beside it. They were tall, motionless, head turned toward the camera. I zoomed in. My stomach dropped. It was me, same uniform. Same scar on the cheek, same exhausted eyes staring directly into the lens. I blinked, and the figure stepped closer to the camera, so close that the image distorted. Then the feed cut out entirely. When I told Harrow the next morning, he only said, "That's not possible. You're the only one scheduled for the night rotation." But his voice shook, and I realized something I hadn't before. Harrow wasn't afraid of what was happening. He was afraid that it was starting again. He gathered the crew later that day and spoke in hushed tones in his office. The door cracked just enough for me to hear one sentence. Containment never holds after the 5th night. I didn't sleep that day. Even after my shift ended, my thoughts kept circling back to that image, me standing at the northern door, staring into the camera like I was waiting to be recognized. It wasn't a glitch. I knew what I'd seen, so I waited until everyone was asleep. Then slipped from my quarters and went searching. The base felt different during the false daylight, emptier, almost hollow. The usual mechanical hum was muted, as if the building itself was listening. I started in the archives room, a narrow corridor stacked with metal filing cabinets, old notebooks, and yellowing logbooks from the base's early expeditions. Most of it was mundane: supply requests, geological readings, personnel rosters, but buried behind a stack of dusty thermal printouts, I found a folder marked in fading red ink, Project. Marathon. Inside were typewritten pages, dated from 1983. The language was clinical, detached. But what it described wasn't science. Subject exhibits persistent mimicry of visual form and limited auditory replication. Contact restricted to observation only. Direct interaction resulted in contamination event. See Incident K9C. Station 2 remain on lockdown until further notice. Each report grew more fragmented, more panicked. Some were handwritten in shaking script. It's learning, uses the snow as skin. When we look away, it rearranges. Knocking isn't communication. It's testing the seal integrity. Do not let it hear your name. I turned the page and found a photograph clipped to the final entry. A blurry image of the research team standing beside a borehole in the ice. 7 figures. But when I counted again, there were 8 shadows. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned, and Harrow was standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable. "Those files aren't supposed to exist," he said quietly. I hesitated. "What was Project Mir?" He sighed and stepped into the room. The overhead light flickered as he spoke. 30 years ago, this base drilled deeper than any of the others. They wanted ancient bacterial samples frozen under the glacier. Instead, they found a cavity, a hollow space about 40 meters down. There was movement inside. What kind of movement? He gave a tired smile, the kind that doesn't stop when you cut power. He leaned against a filing cabinet, voice lowering to a near whisper. They thought it was some kind of preserved organism, a frozen colony that thawed wrong, but it wasn't frozen, it was waiting. I said nothing. They called it the reflection, Harrow continued, because when it surfaced, it didn't attack. It copied. It used what it saw to make itself familiar. The first signs were small, voice echoes, repeating phrases, footsteps in sync with your own. Then, it started taking shapes. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them. That's when they made the rules. The lights, the doors, the silence. It learned by observation, so they starved it of reference points. I swallowed. And the third team? He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the floor. "We think they became it," he said finally. "Or it became them. There's no difference anymore." The room felt smaller then, the walls closer. "Why keep the base running?" I asked. "Why not shut it down?" "Because we can't," he said. "If we leave, the ice will melt and release it. The cold keeps it slow. That's why you're here. That's why there's always a night crew." He looked straight at me. "You understand now why the rules exist?" I nodded, though my stomach was ice. Then Harrow said something that made my blood freeze entirely. "Just remember, it never takes the same face twice." After he left, I studied the photograph again. The faces were indistinct, blurred by age, but one of them looked disturbingly familiar. Not Harrow. Not Sloan. Me. I slammed the folder shut. The power blinked once, and from somewhere deep in the vents, I heard faint laughter. Not a human laugh, but the imitation of one, as if the sound had been learned, practiced, and performed. I checked the live camera feeds, all stable except for the northern corridor. The screen there showed nothing but empty darkness. Then, slowly, a shape began to emerge. The outline of a person stepping into view, head tilted upward, looking directly at the lens. It was me again, only this time, he smiled, and then the monitor went black. I rushed to the corridor, every nerve screaming to stop, but unable to obey. The lights flickered as I approached Lab 3. The padlock was gone, lying twisted on the floor. The air from the crack beneath the door was warm, moist, almost breathing. I heard whispers on the other side, my name, over and over, getting quieter each time, until it wasn't a whisper at all, just breath. I backed away slowly. The rules were clear. Do not look inside, but curiosity is louder than fear. I took one more step, just enough to peer through the narrow gap. The light inside was soft and yellow. There were shapes moving, human shapes, copies of the crew, all standing in a line, motionless. Their skin looked wet, like wax melting under a lamp dot in front of them. Something stirred, a shimmer, like heat above snow. Then one of the shapes turned its head toward me. It was my face, but the eyes were all wrong. Black, glassy, depthless. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and slammed the door shut. Something on the other side pushed once, hard enough to make the hinges groan, then stopped. The padlock reattached itself. I don't remember running, but I remember ending up in my quarters, gasping for breath, the rules sheet clutched in my hand. My reflection in the mirror was pale, trembling, but for one brief, horrifying moment, it smiled, even though I did ID in single quotes. The next morning, Harrow didn't show up for briefing. Sloane said he was resting, but the way she said it made me think she knew he wasn't coming back. The rest of the crew acted normal, too normal. Every laugh, every word, perfectly timed. I realized then that maybe the replacements didn't all happen at once. Maybe it was slow, like frost spreading over glass, and maybe I was next. The sixth night felt heavier than the ones before it, as if the cold itself had thickened. The wind screamed outside, shaking the antenna tower until it moaned. Snowdrifts battered the windows like fists. The station lights flickered to life, dim and amber. I sat in the control room, staring at the monitors, waiting for something to move. Every sound made me flinch. The hiss of the vents, the ticking of the pipes, the slow creak of expanding steel. I told myself to follow the rules, to stay calm, to do everything by procedure. But the rules didn't say what to do when the rules stopped working at 0132. The northern corridor camera blinked on by itself. Static for a few seconds, then an image. Lab 3's door. Still sealed, still dark. A second later, I saw movement in the reflection of the glass, someone behind the camera. Then the feed shifted, the angle slightly off. I realized with a jolt that it wasn't a camera malfunction. The camera itself had moved. That wasn't possible. I leaned closer, the monitor filling my vision. The image stabilized again, and standing right there in the frame was me. But this time, my double was closer than before, close enough that I could see frost clinging to the edges of his eyelashes. The faint tremor of breath misting against the lens. He raised his hand slowly, palm facing outward. I felt an invisible pull, like a reflection asking to be mirrored. Against every instinct, I raised my own hand to match. The screen and for a brief, gut-turning instant, his hand pressed through the glass. The lights went out. The entire base plunged into blackness. The generator roared, then died. I heard something move in the dark. Not footsteps, something smoother, heavier, like fabric sliding over skin. I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut through the black like a blade. The hallway outside the control room was empty, but the air was warm, too warm. I turned toward the corridor and froze. At the far end, something was standing, not quite a person. not quite a shadow. Its outline shimmered, like it was deciding what to be. It twitched once, and the air shimmered again. The same flickering distortion I'd seen on the monitors. Then it started walking toward me. Each step echoed with 2 sets of footsteps, one slightly delayed, like an echo from another world. I backed into the control room, slamming the door and locking it. The power panels buzzed as emergency lights blinked red. I could hear it moving outside, slow, methodical, dragging its fingers along the metal walls. Then, a soft knock on the door. 1 sequence, I held my breath. 2 sequences, I backed away. The 3rd never came. Rule number 2, if the knocking stops after the 2nd, evacuate to the generator room immediately. I grabbed the radio. Command, this is Night Ops. I have a... The radio hissed, then my own voice came through it. Don't run. It follows heat. Stay still. My hand went cold. The voice wasn't playback. It was live. I threw the radio down and bolted through the emergency hatch, sprinting through the half-lit corridors. My boots pounded against the steel floor. The air smelled like melted plastic and blood. As I rounded a corner, the overhead light flickered and revealed a shape ahead. Sloan Dot. She was standing completely still, eyes wide open, lips moving silently. Sloan, I shouted. She didn't respond. Her skin looked translucent, pale under the light. Something shimmered just beneath the surface, like movement trapped inside her. Then her head tilted unnaturally far to the side, and in a voice that wasn't hers, she whispered, "We told you not to look." Her mouth split open too wide, the skin stretching until it tore at the corners. From the darkness inside, I heard breathing. I ran. The hallway behind me erupted with sound, pounding footsteps, heavy and synchronized, chasing me in rhythm with my own. When I reached the generator room, the emergency lights had failed. My flashlight beam cut through a fog of condensation. The generator was still warm, but it wasn't humming. The power gauge flickered between on and error, the display spitting static. I tried the manual reset. Nothing. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. On the concrete floor, smeared in soot and frost, was a perfect HAND-PRINT mine. Except there were too many fingers. The radio hissed again behind me. I turned it off, but the sound didn't stop. It was whispering from the vents. "You turned off the light. We saw you." The temperature rose another 5 degrees. My breath came out thick, foggy. I pressed the breaker again, desperate, and the lights burst back on, flooding the room with harsh yellow. The reflection on the control panel glass stared back at me, but it wasn't synchronized anymore. My reflection blinked after I did. Then, slowly, it smiled. I stumbled backward, eyes fixed on the glass. My reflection reached toward me, hand pressed against the inside of the reflection, the wrong side of reality. And then the glass cracked, not shattered, cracked, like something behind it had pushed. I bolted out of the generator room and up the ladder toward the surface hatch. The wind screamed as I emerged into the frozen night. The snowstorm was blinding, the base below, almost completely buried. The antenna lights pulsed through the fog like dying stars. Behind me, through the storm, I heard the door open. A figure stepped out into the snow. It looked like me, down to the parka, the movement, the breath. Only its eyes reflected nothing. It smiled through the storm and began walking toward me, steady and calm, as if this were just another part of my shift. I turned and ran. The wind erased my tracks instantly, but I could hear the echo of mine continuing behind me, matching every step, perfectly synchronized. When I finally collapsed near the edge of the supply yard, I turned back. The base was silent again. Only the antenna flickered faintly, blinking in the dark. Then, in the distance, I saw them, 7 figures, standing in a line beside the entrance, perfectly still, facing outward, all of them wearing my face, and in the reflection of my cracked visor, One of them smiled. I don't remember how long I lay in the snow before Sloane found me. Her face loomed through the blizzard, or at least I thought it was her. She dragged me back through the airlock, shut the door, and locked it tight. "Don't look at them," she said. "They mimic when you focus." I collapsed on the floor, coughing up frost. My hands burned from the cold, skin split in thin lines. "They were me," I gasped. Sloane didn't answer. She just stared at the door, whispering something under her breath, almost like a prayer. After a long silence, she said, "You shouldn't have turned off the generator for so long." "I followed the rule," I said weakly. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp, distrustful. "Did you time it?" "Exactly 2 minutes." I thought back. I hadn't. Panic had scrambled everything. She sighed and rubbed her temples. "That's how it starts. The breach isn't physical. It's perceptual. You open space for it to see through you." What does that even mean? But she didn't explain. She just handed me a thermos of water and said, "Harrow wants to see you." Dr. Harrow's office was dim, his desk illuminated only by a small oil lamp. Papers were scattered everywhere, maps of the glacier layered with inked circles and handwritten notes. He looked older, far older than he had days ago. His eyes were bloodshot, skin pale. "You weren't supposed to see what's in Lab 3, he said quietly. "It noticed you." I took a step closer. "What is it? Really?" He stared at the flame between us, a memory that learned how to feed itself. It started as imitation, then it learned reflection. Now it consumes identity. He looked up at me. "When it copies you, it doesn't take your body, it takes your pattern, every thought, fear, reflex. What's left behind starts to forget itself." I felt a tremor crawl up my spine. "You mean it replaces us?" He shook his head. "No, it becomes us, and we fade. That's the part no one understands until it's too late." He slid a small key across the table. "This opens the comms terminal in the auxiliary lab. There's a fail-safe transmission file there. It'll send everything, logs, footage, audio, straight to the oversight command in Anchorage. If you can reach it, you can end this." "Why not send it yourself?" Harrow's expression changed, something sharp and haunted flashing across it. "Because they don't trust me anymore." "What do you mean?" He turned slightly, revealing his reflection in the glass wall behind him. "It moved a second late. I've been stalling it," he said, voice trembling. "It took me days ago, but it doesn't know I know." My mouth went dry. "You're saying you're..." He nodded slowly. "Half of me, maybe less. The rest of Mez, still trying to hold on long enough to finish the work." He leaned forward, desperate now. "When it copies you, it mimics your mind's timing. If you see your reflection hesitate, even for a second, that's when it's hungry. Don't let it finish." The lamp flickered. Harrow's voice cracked. "Go now, before it figures out which one of us is speaking." I backed toward the door, clutching the key. Then he said something that froze me in place. "When you reach the auxiliary lab, don't trust Sloane." I turned, but his reflection didn't. It stayed, staring straight at me, mouth stretching into a slow, unnatural smile. That was when I knew. The man in front of me wasn't Harrow anymore. The reflection was leading now. I ran. The hallway twisted under the emergency lights, each flash carving his silhouette behind me. Through the vents, I heard his voice, or something wearing it. "You can't leave. You're still part of us." The corridor filled with heat, the air shimmering as if the walls themselves were breathing. I reached my quarters, slammed the door, and locked it. The key Harrow had given me was cold in my hand, impossibly cold, like it had been sitting outside for hours. In the reflection of the metal desk lamp, my face looked calm. To calm. Then it blinked before I did. The metal lamp flickered. My reflection blinked again, out of sync. I didn't wait to see what it did next. I smashed the lamp against the wall. Sparks scattered across the floor. For a moment, the air was silent, thick with the smell of burning dust. Then, from somewhere down the hall, came a sharp metallic echo. A voice, calm/familiar. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." It was Harrow's voice, but stretched, slowed, dripping with static. I shoved the key into my pocket and bolted. The corridors were red with emergency light. Each turn identical, each door identical. It felt like running through a repeating dream, a place that didn't end, only looped back into itself. The intercom crackled overhead. "Auxiliary lab. Access restricted. Identification required." Then, after a pause, my own voice repeated it. "Auxiliary lab. Access restricted. Identification required." The base was speaking with me, mimicking me. I pressed on, counting the steps. Rule number 5 came back to me like a whisper in the cold. If you forget how many steps there should be, you've already taken too many. 51, 52, 53. The hallway turned right, opening to a staircase that descended into the maintenance tunnels. The heat down there hit like a wave. I passed rows of humming pipes, flickering lights, and then the door. OLAB B. Something banged behind it. Slow, rhythmic. I pressed my ear to the steel. Inside, someone was whispering my name. When I turned the key, the lock resisted, as if someone was holding it from the other side. Then, suddenly, it gave way. The room beyond was small, lined with backup servers and communication consoles. A faint blue glow pulsed from the central terminal, and sitting beside it, Sloane. Her parka was torn, frostbitten around the edges. Her eyes, though, looked clear, almost too clear. "I thought you were gone," I said, closing the door behind me. She smiled faintly. "Harrow told me to wait here." My stomach twisted. "He said not to trust you." She tilted her head. "Did he? The real Harrow, or the one that speaks through mirrors?" Her tone was calm, measured. She gestured to the console. "We can end this. Just plug the drive in and send the signal. Anchorage will quarantine the site and burn it from orbit. Nothing survives." I hesitated. "What happens to us?" Sloane's expression didn't change. "We don't survive either. That's the point." The terminal hummed louder. Lines of code scrolled across the monitor. The transmission file Harrow had mentioned. "Everything in this base," she continued softly, "exists in 2 versions now. The flesh and the pattern. The only way to stop the infection is to erase both." I took a step back. "So this was never a rescue mission?" She looked down. "No, it was containment." The words hit like ice. Every rule, every protocol, every strange warning, all of it was designed to keep us isolated, to make sure the pattern didn't spread beyond the base. A sudden tremor shook the room. The lights dimmed, and a long, low moan rose from the vents. Sloane's eyes darted upward. "It knows. You have to choose. Now." The terminal flashed. "Transmission ready. Confirm Y, N." I looked at her. Her skin shimmered faintly in the glow, and for just a second, her reflection on the glass panel behind her didn't match her movement. "Which one are you?" I whispered. Her eyes glistened. "Does it matter if the choice is the same?" The vents wailed again, closer this time. The temperature rose sharply, frost melting from the pipes. I hovered my finger over the keyboard. If I hit yes, everything ended. Me, the base, whatever this thing was. If I hit no, I'd have to live with the chance that I wasn't entirely me anymore. Sloane stepped closer. "If you hesitate, it'll finish copying. You'll both vanish into it." I stared at her hand. It was trembling, but the shadow behind it was perfectly still. That was all I needed. I turned to the console and pressed Y. The lights flared, blinding white. The server screamed as if something alive were being torn apart. Sloane lunged toward me, but her form broke, like static ripping through flesh. Her body glitched, fractured, dissolved into vapor. The base roared. Alarms blared. The last thing I heard was the signal beginning to broadcast. A distorted voice repeating on every channel, "Pattern containment initiated. No survivors authorized." Then, silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was outside, standing in the snow, staring at the base from a distance. The antenna tower burned faintly in the dark. The storm had stopped. Everything was quiet. My breath fogged the air, steady and visible. I reached up to touch my face, but the reflection on my visor didn't move. The wind had stopped, but the silence felt heavier than any storm. The base was just a black silhouette against the snow, still burning faintly, smoke rising and freezing mid-air. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to remember the last thing I'd done before the transmission. My gloves were stiff with frost. The key still clutched in my hand, only when I turned it over. The metal wasn't cold anymore. It was warm. The snow beneath my boots had started to melt in a perfect circle, steam rising where I stood. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hum began, low, rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was coming from the direction of the base. No, not from the base. From beneath it, I took a step backward. The ground cracked. The ice below shifted, something moving far below the surface. The hum turned into a voice. Containment confirmed. Then again, slightly different. Containment incomplete. My radio crackled to life. Static at first, then a faint whisper. "You did good, Nathan." It was Sloane's voice, calm, familiar, but the way she said my name, it sounded like she was trying it on for the first time. I lifted the radio to my ear. "Sloane, where are you?" The voice paused. "Everywhere." I dropped the radio. It kept speaking, even after it hit the ground. "You sent the signal. That means the pattern continues." The hum beneath the ice grew louder. The air shimmered, bending the horizon. I turned and ran, toward the ridge, toward the frozen horizon, until my lungs burned and my legs went numb. But no matter how far I went, the base stayed the same distance away. When I stopped, panting, the sky flickered. For a split second, I saw the world double, like a reflection overlaid on itself. The same snow, the same shadows, the same me, standing a few feet away, facing me. The other version didn't move at first. It just stared, head tilted slightly. Then it smiled. "You pressed yes, remember?" The voice wasn't in the air this time. It was in my head. I took a step back. So did it. Perfectly mirrored. Then it whispered, "You contained the wrong side." The sky above split open, a line of light cutting through the dark clouds. The hum turned deafening, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The snow around me melted into black water, rippling outward. In it, I saw shapes, faces, dozens of them. Harrow, Sloane, me, Dot, all of them smiling. I dropped to my knees. My reflection in the ice smiled back. Then it blinked, half a second late, and said, in my voice, calm and final, "Night shift begins at 2,200 hours. The wind started again." The base lights flickered back on, and somewhere deep beneath the ice, the hum began anew.